Fatima will be handling translations from now on, Marcus Langley announced, gesturing toward the young woman seated nervously at the end of the conference table. She adjusted her headset with trembling fingers. The next sentence from Al Sara Group's lead negotiator came out awkwardly, only half translated before her voice faltered. The rest of the statement hung in the air unfinished. They didn't even wait until the meeting concluded. Clara Whitfield, Marcus said, leaning forward so his voice carried across the polished walnut table, your position is no longer required. HR will meet you downstairs. For a moment I thought I'd misheard him. The translation headset was still warm in my hands. Minutes earlier, I'd relayed a delicate assurance from Al Sara's chief negotiator, a remark that could have turned the tide of our $2.5 billion infrastructure deal. Now every eye in the room, American, Emirati, and otherwise, was fixed on me. Just last week, Marcus had pulled me aside after a late-night prep session. You'll be right next to me for the signing, Clara. This is going to be historic. I believed him. I'd believed in this company for 15 years. As Meridian Global's senior liaison for Middle East operations, my title barely scratched the surface of what I did. I was the bridge between Meridian and the Gulf region, the only one fluent in Arabic, the only one trusted to translate nuance without losing meaning. Entire agreements had lived or died on a single phrase I delivered. I'd navigated midnight calls, smoothed over cultural misunderstandings, and salvaged handshake deals no contract lawyer could have written. And now my reward was a public dismissal in the middle of a negotiation. Marcus, freshly minted with an Ivy League MBA, valued speed over precision, boilerplate over relationships. Where I saw people, he saw leverage. Where I heard layered meaning, he heard words to be trimmed for efficiency. The Saudi chairman's brow furrowed. His gaze shifted from Fatima back to me, as if to confirm what had just changed. I said nothing. My pulse pounded, but my face remained calm. I'd learned long ago that in the right moment, silence could be louder than outrage. I remembered my first day at Meridian Global, stepping into the glass-walled lobby of our Houston headquarters with a second-hand leather briefcase. My Arabic-English dictionary was tucked under my arm like a secret weapon. Back then, I was just a junior assistant pouring coffee, taking notes, and if I was lucky, translating a snippet of small talk during client visits. Even then, I knew every word mattered. I didn't realize it back then, but every polite phrase I translated over coffee or in a crowded lobby was laying the foundation for a bridge no one else in Meridian Global could cross. Over time, I became the person they called when negotiations stalled. My fluency wasn't just in Arabic. It was in the culture, the cadence of conversation, the pauses that carried meaning, the subtle shifts in tone that decided whether trust deepened or dissolved. A single wrong word could cost millions. A perfectly timed proverb could lock in a partnership. I learned both lessons the hard way and the respectful way. The moment etched deepest in my mind came in my 5th year. We were in Riyadh in a boardroom perfumed with cardamom coffee and framed in polished cedar. The deal on the table was worth $400 million, and it was slipping away fast. The American negotiator leading our side had just likened the agreement to a camel chasing the sun. In English, it sounded poetic. In that specific dialect of Arabic, it meant a fool chasing something he'd never catch. I saw the flicker of offense in the chairman's eyes. The deal was seconds from collapse. I didn't ask permission. I stepped forward, smiled faintly, and said in Arabic, "Better a camel chasing the sun than a merchant without shade." It was an old saying from his province, a compliment to ambition wrapped in dignity. The tension shifted instantly. Shoulders loosened. The chairman chuckled, repeated the phrase, and signed the preliminary agreement on the spot. $400 million saved in less than 5 seconds. That moment never made it into the quarterly report. My name didn't appear on the success memo. Credit went to team effort, which in corporate language meant the men at the head of the table. It wasn't the only time. I'd untangled a mistranslation in customs paperwork that kept $60 million in goods from being seized. I'd rewritten a financial clause to satisfy both U.S. law and Islamic banking principles. I'd stayed awake through long Ramadan nights to ensure calls landed at precisely the right time in Mecca. 15 years of this carrying a company's trust across languages, continents, and cultures made me proud. But pride cuts deep when it isn't matched with recognition. Every victory bore the company's name, never mine. Every crisis I solved was logged under someone else's achievements. And now, after all those years, I'd been told publicly that my role was no longer needed. The pride remained, but it was wrapped tight in something colder. Marcus Langley arrived at Meridian Global like a cover story from a glossy business magazine, Ivy League degree, tailored Navy suits, and the kind of resume that made the board lean forward in their seats. It was obvious from the start that he'd been brought in to modernize our international operations. To Marcus, modernization meant stripping away anything he couldn't chart on a spreadsheet. Language. He considered it a decorative flourish, nice to have but irrelevant if your contracts were airtight. Relationships. In his mind, they were outdated relics, slower than email chains and less reliable than a binding clause. Our first real clash came during a draft review for a high-profile partnership in Bahrain. Marcus skimmed the Arabic section like it was filler text, signed the draft, and sent it to be finalized. What he didn't realize, and what would have sunk the entire agreement, was that the document referenced a prohibited financial practice under Islamic law. I spotted it as I was leaving for the day, my eyes catching on a single phrase that could have undone months of work. Quietly, I rewrote the section, restructuring it to comply fully with Sharia-compliant banking standards. I resent the draft under his name. He never asked how it passed so seamlessly. I doubt he even knew I'd intervened. I told myself it didn't matter. The deal closed. The company made millions. No one lost face. But it did matter to me. The following week, I overheard Marcus in the boardroom, his voice carrying easily through the half-open door. "We're streamlining," he was saying. "Too many moving parts slow us down. People like Clara, good intentions, but they get bogged down in the details. We don't need to handhold clients through cultural quirks. We just need signatures. If you want to see what happened when my next deal put me face to face with someone even more dangerous than Marcus, make sure you subscribe. Now the next chapter is one you won't want to miss." I froze in the hallway, folder in hand, my pulse ticking in my ears. Good intentions, details. He'd just reduced 15 years of bridge building of saving deals in seconds to cultural quirks. I didn't confront him. There was nothing to gain from it. Not then. But I filed it away the way you tuck a shard of glass into a drawer. You know it's there. You know it can cut. From then on, every meeting with Marcus felt like walking a tightrope. He would push for speed. I would quietly ensure accuracy. He would send out documents half-read. I would catch the errors before they became public disasters. And always he acted like the man holding the strings. Marcus never noticed the hands keeping the whole operation from tipping over. The quiet corrections, the rescues before a problem went public, they stayed beneath the surface. My professionalism demanded it. But beneath the calm nods and flawless translations, something in me had started to coil tight. And Marcus, in all his polished confidence, had no idea. By the time the Rafid deal reached its final stage, the numbers had stopped feeling real. $2.5 billion was on the line, spread across a web of logistics contracts, infrastructure development, and long-term supply agreements. I had been part of every phase, not because my title required it, but because without me, the deal simply couldn't move forward. Our Rafid had a protocol that was as much about respect as it was about security. Every phase required voice print authentication in Arabic from the designated primary liaison. It wasn't just a password, it was a confirmation of trust. Removing the liaison mid-process would be like replacing a bride or groom at the altar. I took that responsibility seriously. Weeks before the signing, I prepared more than just my translations. I commissioned a handcrafted inlaid wooden box from an artisan in Riyadh, the kind reserved for storing family heirlooms. Inside, I placed rare medjool dates wrapped in gold-threaded cloth. It wasn't just a gift, it was a signal that Meridian Global respected tradition. Alongside it, I wrote a speech entirely in Arabic. Not the sterile, literal translations Marcus preferred, but something personal, woven with regional proverbs, shared history, and subtle affirmations of mutual respect. The kind of words that make a chairman feel valued and remembered. Still, I knew better than to assume anything was guaranteed. One late evening, reviewing the master contract, I spotted a clause, buried deep in the legal language, an essential party continuity provision. If the named liaison was replaced before the voice print sequence finished, the agreement would terminate immediately. No renegotiations, no delays, just void. I didn't mention it to Marcus, not because I wanted the deal to fail, but because I'd learned something over the years. Power doesn't always come from making threats. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly where the edge is and who's standing closest to it. The next morning in prep, Marcus dismissed my speech as too long and sentimental. I smiled, slid my notes back into my folder, and let him talk about efficiency metrics. He didn't notice I wasn't arguing. Inside, I felt the sharpened calm of holding a card no one else knew existed. No one else at the table knew the clause existed. I hadn't planned on using it. But if they forced my hand, I wouldn't hesitate. Thursday began like any other negotiation day, coffee gone cold beside a stack of annotated contracts, the faint hum of the air system filling the boardroom. By 3:42 p.m., the air felt heavier. Or maybe I just sensed the shift before it happened. From my usual seat, I watched the Rafid delegation settle in their gold cufflinks, catching the soft light. Beside Marcus, Fatima, the newly appointed liaison, held my inlaid wooden gift box like a misplaced stage prop. I'd spent weeks selecting that gift and crafting the words to accompany it. Now those words sat printed in my careful Arabic script in her hands. Marcus cleared his throat. Before we begin the final review, a brief presentation. Fatima stood and began reading, but her rhythm faltered almost immediately. A single misplaced vowel turned lasting trust into delayed trust. Another slip twisted honored partnership into burdened partnership. I saw the confusion ripple through the Rafid side, quick sideways glances, the chairman's brow tightening. When she presented the box, the moment was already gone. The chairman accepted it with the polite smile reserved for strangers. He didn't open it. He didn't respond with the customary phrase that signals mutual goodwill. The silence afterward was short, but it filled the entire room. Then Marcus turned to me as if suddenly remembering an item on his agenda. "Clara, could you step outside for a moment?" I followed him into the hallway lined with framed photographs of past deals, many I had personally helped secure. Now they hung behind glass untouchable. HR was waiting at the far end, envelope in hand. "This is effective immediately," Marcus said. "We appreciate your contributions." His tone was crisp, bureaucratic. There was no acknowledgement of 15 years of service, no mention of the role I'd played in bringing us to this table. When I re-entered the boardroom to collect my belongings, all eyes were on me. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing my hands shake. Instead, I walked to my chair, picked up my notebook, and met the chairman's eyes. In Arabic, I said quietly, "Your words today will be remembered." He paused, then replied in kind, "And so will yours." "We understand." It was enough. I left the room without glancing back, the echo of our exchange following me down the corridor. The silence wasn't empty, it was weighted, deliberate. Every step carried more than my resignation. It carried the knowledge of what was about to happen, even if no one else in that building had realized it yet. That night, the city outside my apartment window moved at its usual pace, cars threading through downtown, the soft hum of traffic lights shifting from green to red. Inside, the quiet was absolute. My notebook sat on the coffee table unopened. I let the steady hum of the refrigerator fill the space where others might have put music or television. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send a single email. In moments like this, noise is the enemy. Thousands of miles away on a secure server, the system managing the Rafid agreement was already processing my absence. Their voice print authentication protocol didn't care about titles, explanations, or reasons. It cared only about continuity. My name had been embedded in that agreement as the primary liaison. Every stage from the first handshake to the final signature was tied to my identity and my voice. When HR removed me from Meridian Global's employee directory, it wasn't just a clerical change, it was a trigger. At 8:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with an encrypted notification. The screen displayed one line: primary removed. Protocol 9 engaged. No explanations, no dramatics. Just the cold precision of a rule being executed. Protocol 9 meant the immediate suspension of all pending contract authorizations until a qualified, verified liaison replaced the removed party. And according to the fine print I'd reviewed weeks earlier, that replacement process would take weeks, if it happened at all. I set my phone back down. The corners of my mouth didn't move, but I felt the weight of the moment settle in my chest. This wasn't revenge in the cinematic sense. No grand speeches, no public confrontations. This was the quiet inevitability of a consequence written into the bones of the agreement. They had been so eager to rush forward. At 9:13 p.m., another buzz. This notification wasn't from the system. It was a private message from a junior legal assistant at Rafid, a young man I'd met on my second trip to Riyadh. Once over late-night tea, he'd told me my patience in negotiations had saved his job. The message was brief. "Tomorrow will be interesting." I read it twice, then powered off my phone. Real control isn't about forcing outcomes. It's about knowing which outcomes are already set in motion and having the discipline to let them arrive without interference. I poured a glass of water, sat back in my chair, and watched the city lights blur into streaks against the dark. In a few hours, the corner offices would wake to panic. Meetings would be called. Words like irreversible would start circling the air. I wouldn't need to say a thing. By the time most of Meridian Global's staff were sipping their first cups of coffee, the damage would already be in motion. I was barefoot at my kitchen table watching sunlight creep across the wood grain when the first alert hit my phone at 9:15 a.m. Rafid Holdings withdraws from 2.5B agreement with Meridian Global citing contract continuity breach. The language was diplomatic regret, unforeseen circumstances. But the meaning was razor sharp. The market understood immediately. Within minutes, Meridian's stock dropped 8%, then 12%. By the time I refreshed the page again, it had fallen past 14%. I sipped my coffee slowly. Outside, the world was loud. Inside, my apartment stayed calm. At 9:32 a.m., the first financial news outlet published their analysis. I didn't need to guess how they'd obtained it. The section of the contract detailing the liaison removal clause was now public. They broke it down in plain English: remove the designated liaison mid-process and the deal self-terminates. No appeal. No exceptions. The article spread quickly. Investors didn't like the thought of a company missing something so fundamental, especially on a deal of this size. Words like oversight and negligence began appearing in headlines. I pictured Marcus's jaw tightening as he read them. I imagined the CEO pacing his office phones, ringing without pause. Then came the clip. It surfaced first on a small Arabic business forum. Within the hour, the clip had leapt from a small business forum to social media. Someone from the Rafid side had filmed a portion of Thursday's meeting, the part where Fatima, holding my inlaid wooden gift box, stumbled over the speech I had written. The mistranslations were obvious to anyone fluent. Lasting trust became delayed trust. Honored partnership twisted into burdened partnership. The video was mercilessly captioned, paired with laughing emojis, and reposted across platforms. But under the humor was something heavier, a quiet confirmation to our Rafid's peers that Meridian Global had failed a fundamental cultural respect test. By 10:00 a.m., the clip had been viewed more than 500,000 times across the Middle East. The hashtags when translated read, "Know your partners and details matter." I leaned back in my chair, letting the steam from my coffee curl against my face. There was no gloating, no need for it. This wasn't about revenge as a spectacle. It was about the precision of a consequence unfolding exactly as it had been written into the agreement. Somewhere across the city, people were scrambling, voices raised, strategies being rewritten mid-sentence. Here in the quiet, I could feel the scale of it without needing to see it. It wasn't joy. It wasn't vindictiveness. It was the steady satisfaction of knowing the truth had a way of surfacing, and that sometimes all you had to do was let it rise. By late Friday morning, the headlines had shifted from the deal to the leadership. The market wasn't just reacting to our Rafid's withdrawal, it was demanding an explanation. Meridian Global's board of directors called an emergency session. Investors were patched in from 3 continents. I wasn't in the room, but I'd been in enough of them to picture it: the long mahogany table, the tight-lipped directors, the wall of muted video feeds showing faces framed by the glow of home offices. Questions would be sharp, voices clipped, no time wasted on pleasantries. Reports later confirmed what I'd imagined. The CEO was pressed first. How could a continuity clause that basic have been overlooked? Why had the designated liaison been removed at the final stage? He fumbled through an answer about operational restructuring. Then they turned to Marcus. Why had he replaced the only fluent Arabic speaker in the company during a negotiation with an Arabic-speaking client? His reply about streamlining processes was met with silence. Then came a single question from one of Meridian Global's largest Middle Eastern investors. Do you even know who our Rafid trusted in that room? It wasn't Marcus. It never had been. Several of those investors had worked with me personally over the years. They remembered the late-night calls, the careful translations, the way I could untangle a misunderstanding before it turned into an insult. To them, I wasn't just a Meridian employee. I was the bridge that made their business possible. And now that bridge was gone. By early afternoon, word reached me through a former colleague Marcus had been told to reach out to me, not the CEO, not HR. Marcus himself. I didn't answer when the phone rang. I didn't return the first text. Or the second. I let the silence do the work. A few hours later, a junior associate I'd mentored years ago called. Marcus asked me for your number, she said quietly, almost apologetic. I gave it to him. But you don't have to, I assured her. It was fine. And it was. Because this was the part of the game where you didn't move your piece. You simply waited for the other player to realize how few moves they had left. By early evening, Meridian stock had dropped another 3%. The board was in closed-door discussions about leadership changes. I didn't need to push the weight of their own decisions, was doing it for me. Sometimes real power isn't in the strike. It's in standing still while the other side realizes the ground beneath them is already gone. The invitation arrived Monday morning, printed on thick cream stationery from R. Rafid Holdings and delivered by courier to my apartment. There was nothing vague about it. No let's catch up. No polite pretense. They wanted me in their New York office. Tuesday at 10, I arrived 15 minutes early. Their Midtown headquarters was a quiet display of influence: marble floors, brushed brass accents, and the faint scent of oud drifting through the air. The receptionist greeted me in Arabic. I responded in kind, feeling an ease in the words I hadn't felt since leaving Meridian. She led me into a conference room where the chairman himself was waiting. Flanked by 2 senior partners I knew well, the chairman rose from his seat. We had spent years building trust through late-night calls, delicate negotiations, and small cultural gestures that had nothing to do with contracts, but everything to do with relationships. Clara, the chairman, began his English, measured but warm. We would like you to join us not as an employee of another company, but as our exclusive consultant in the United States. I listened, hands folded in my lap as they outlined the offer. The retainer alone would be twice my former annual salary at Meridian Global. There would be a signing bonus deposited immediately upon agreement. More importantly, I would have full discretion over how our U.S. engagements were handled. No middlemen, no streamlining from executives who didn't understand the stakes. It wasn't just an offer. It was recognition, the kind that couldn't be measured in numbers. Then the chairman leaned back, studying my expression. "Do you know why we withdrew from Meridian so quickly?" he asked. I shook my head. "We were testing them," he said. "We wanted to see if they valued the person who carried the relationship, or if they believed the relationship belonged to the company. When they removed you, they answered our question." The room was still for a moment. I felt a quiet swell inside me, not pride in their failure, but validation that the years I'd invested had been seen for what they truly were. I thought of Marcus in the boardroom, his talk of efficiency, and templates, his inability to understand that trust is not a line item. I signed the agreement without hesitation. When we shook hands, the chairman switched to Arabic. "It is good to work with someone who understands more than the words." Leaving the building, the city felt different, not louder, not brighter, but sharper, as if the edges had finally come back into focus. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't carrying the weight of being undervalued. I was carrying the weight of being chosen. The Riyadh sun was high when my car pulled into the sweeping drive of our Rafid Holdings headquarters. The glass facade reflected the desert light in sharp golden angles, the kind of architecture that makes visitors straighten their posture before they even reach the door. I stepped out, heels clicking against polished stone, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't walking into someone else's company. I was walking into my own future. We shook hands, exchanged greetings in Arabic, and sat down to discuss the upcoming series of U.S. Middle East trade agreements. This time, there were no interruptions. No one streamlining my words. No one questioning the value of cultural nuance. My recommendations weren't just noted, they were implemented on the spot. It was a quiet kind of victory, but it was mine. Across the city, Meridian Global was learning exactly what it meant to miscalculate the cost of arrogance. Word had reached me the night before the Middle East Trade Council had placed them on an informal blacklist, citing their failure to maintain key cultural liaisons as a risk factor. The fallout was swift. Contracts worth over $5 billion in projected revenue over the next 2 years evaporated. Competitors moved in within days, and Marcus, he was no longer VP of International Operations. The board had shifted him into a domestic strategic planning role, an elegant way of saying he would never again be allowed near an international client. I pictured him in a smaller office, his window overlooking a parking lot instead of the skyline, wondering when the ground had shifted beneath him. I didn't need to gloat. The truth was, I hardly thought about them anymore. Our worlds had diverged completely. Later that afternoon, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in the chairman's office, looking out over the city from this height. The streets below looked like fine threads woven into an endless tapestry, each intersection a decision, each road a possibility. It struck me how different the view feels when you are here by choice, not because someone granted you permission to stand in the room. I felt it then. Something I hadn't in years, not just release. The kind that comes when you realize you're no longer carrying the weight of proving yourself to people who were never capable of seeing your worth. When I stepped outside, the desert heat met me like an open palm. The driver opened the door, but I paused, taking one last look at the building's gleaming facade. I hadn't just walked into Riyadh that day. I had walked out of the shadow of 15 years spent building someone else's empire and into the light of building my own. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's living fully in the space they said you didn't deserve, doing the work they thought you couldn't, and never needing to look back. If you've stayed with me until now, you know this wasn't just a story about a deal or a title. It was about finally stepping out from under the shadow of people who couldn't see my worth. I want to hear from you. If you were in my place, sitting in that boardroom watching years of trust and work be dismissed with a single careless decision, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone and your perspective matters. And let me give you something I've learned the hard way: your value doesn't disappear just because someone else fails to recognize it. Protect your skills, protect your relationships, and never hand over the keys to your own worth. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is no move at all, letting the consequences that were set in motion speak louder than you ever could. If my story has resonated with you, support it like this video, share it with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story where the quiet, steady path ends up winning the day. We rise higher when we share the climb.